Hello friends, so today's video is going to be a non-spoiler book review for The Lost Metal by Brandon Sanderson. A big thank you to Macmillan Audio for giving me the opportunity to listen to this early. I want to really emphasize that this is truly spoiler-free. I know for some of you, you've started Era 2, but you still need to get caught up with the Bands of Mourning. I know for some people, they're waiting for the entire series to be completed before jumping into it. Regardless of which camp you fit into, I'm not going to be spoiling anything. And I know that with each new installment of the Cosmere, people are more and more concerned of Cosmere spoilers, so don't worry, I'm not going to give away anything. That said, I am going to break this review up into parts. I'm going to start with some general information. This is one part that you can definitely skip over if you're really familiar with the Cosmere, but I know some people have some questions about if they need to read other things first. From there, I'll be getting into the pacing and the stakes, followed up with character work and character screen time. Then I'll get into some of the action and the magic, followed by emotional beats, themes, and the tone. I'll touch on a little bit my feelings in regards to how this fits within the Cosmere, and then we'll get into some overall thoughts. I'll have timestamps also if you'd like to skip ahead to any of these individual parts. Starting with some general information, I know a big question a lot of people have is what else within the Cosmere do I need to read before I read this book? With The Lost Metal, you obviously want to read Mistborn Era 1 and then the previous 3 books in this series. I would add you also definitely at this point want to read Mistborn Secret History. Aside from that, it is completely dependent on how much you want to be able to pinpoint and recognize certain Easter eggs. I don't think your reading experience is going to rely on having read other Cosmere books like the Stormlight Archive, Warbreaker, Elantris. You don't have to read those to enjoy Mistborn, but if you do like seeing those Easter eggs, you're probably going to want as much as possible to go in close to publication orders so that you can appreciate all those little hints that are there. To be clear though, this does not mean that you absolutely have to. It really does come down to how much do you want to see those little details. The more that Sanderson writes within the Cosmere, the more it's clear that the Cosmere exists, but the characters within this story, their arcs, their stakes, their world, it is going to be contained within this series. Jumping now into some of the individual aspects of the book, I wanted to start with the pacing and the stakes, as I do think that this is where the book absolutely shined. For a lot of us, how invested we feel in high stakes moments comes down to how much we care about the characters. I do think that Sanderson has done a great job within the first 3 books of establishing who these characters are, the sorts of things that are personal obstacles for them, what their motivations are, what they care about, how much they care about each other. We've seen all that in the first 3 books. And so with this 4th one, I think that we definitely see the Sanderlanche essentially throughout this entire book. Once we hit a certain point, it is high speed, high stakes race to the finish line. And if you're a fan of a Sanderlanche, you're gonna get one here. One thing I love about a good series ending is when I can look back at the beginning of the series and I can see where the characters started and what they thought were high stakes situations, what I thought was a high stakes situation, when I can look back on that and in hindsight say that was nothing compared to what we're dealing with now. And I definitely think that was the case with The Lost Metal. I was actually pretty surprised at my reaction to this because Shadows of Self, which is the 2nd book in Era 2, I really like because I feel like something that Sanderson did really well within this series is that he had a tonal shift and I'm going to call it a stakes shift within this. His other series, especially Stormlight Archive, is very, very epic. And Mistborn Era 1, despite only being 3 books long, it starts to feel really epic. And this definitely felt a little bit more intimate, a little bit more connected to the personal things of the characters. And I felt that was very true and that he really leaned into that with the Shadows of Self. So I actually was thinking I wasn't going to get Shadows of Self topped or even tied with this final book because I thought, well, we're going to get really, really intense stakes. We're going to get this Sanderlanche. We're going to get this fast pacing, but I kind of like that smaller feel of that 2nd book, surprisingly. And I couldn't have been more wrong. I really like what he did with the ending. I was genuinely nervous. I was scared. I was invested. I was really pumped about certain moments. And I kind of want to shift this now into the character work and the character screen time, because one of the things that I think made the pacing work so incredibly well was that he utilized each of his characters and their plot lines exceptionally well. I would care so much about what was going on with one character, and I would think, okay, ooh, here we go. And then we would switch to a different character, and I'm like, I want to go back over here though. And then as we were getting further with this character, once we would end that chapter and we'd go back to the character I originally thought I was more invested in, then I was like, well, dang it, but I want to stay here now. And he did it so well where I never felt like I was away from one character for too long, and I never felt like one character's plot line was overwhelming the story, was taking away from other characters. I also have certain characters that I like more than others in this series. A big thing about multiple perspective stories for a lot of us is, okay, I'm here for this character, I don't care about anybody else. And I actually did genuinely care, regardless of if it was a character I love or if it was a character I don't love as much. I was genuinely caring about each of the perspectives, the way that he divided the tension between the characters, the suspense, the intrigue. I thought it was fantastic. I was a little worried that we wouldn't get some of the characters that I like as much as others, and I think we got everybody in just the right amount. In regards to the character work itself, of course, when you have a story that is incredibly high stakes and fast paced, if you spend too much time having characters chat with one another, having these big long conversations, having these really introspective, reflective moments, it starts to kind of make you think as a reader, I guess the threat's not that big of a deal if we're having the time to just dilly-dally for a while. And typically, I love the reflective, introspective parts. It just can't really mesh with the high stakes and fast-paced moments because it detracts from that. That said, I don't think we needed these really slower going character moments because all of the groundwork has been established in the first 3 books. We know these characters, we know what struggles they have and what they deal with. And I think that what Sanderson did very well here is that we had the character moments take place within the action. They don't really have the time to reflect outside of the threat, so they have to reflect within them. And I think some of the revelations that came to the characters, some of the ways in which characters could see each other and they wanted to be there for each other, but they also had these other things going on, so they did little things that they could, and those little things were big to you as the reader because you know how important they are given what we've had established previously. So the character work is there. It's just woven into all of the other high stakes moments. High stakes moments is synonymous basically with the action, and that's the next thing I wanted to jump into. I think a fair criticism that people have of the Mistborn series is the repetitive nature of the action scenes and of the magic itself and how the magic plays a role in the action. I think a lot of people are pretty tired of seeing push and pull constantly used. They feel like, all right, here we go again. Everybody's flying through the air. And I think that's a valid criticism. I do think something Sanderson accomplished with Era 2 was an introduction to the expansion of the magic to some new things that put a twist on what we'd been seeing before and brought something fresh and original to not only his own series, but just a lot of fantasy. I haven't really seen this sort of setting utilize this kind of magic and create this really interesting blend. We are into the 4th book in this series though, so how much more unique can we get? That was one thing I was wondering. I was thinking, all right, I'm sure I'll care a lot about what's happening, but I also think action scenes aren't always my favorite, so that might not be a thing I love about this one. I loved the action scenes. There would be moments where I was invested in the story and I was like, yeah, like I was physically reacting to things that would happen. There is absolutely the here comes the cavalry. There's one moment in particular that I was like, yes, and I could just picture it and it was vivid, and it just gets you kind of riled up where you're like, I'm ready to fight some people too. And there was some really great action scenes. And I think that Sanderson had the characters meet their matches in this. I thought that some of the ways in which they had to outwit their enemies, outwit the thing that they were going up against, was really exciting to see. A lot of what I've been praising about the story so far has been those high intensity type of moments. I do want to take a second now though to talk about some of the themes, the emotional beats, and the tone. This is especially difficult to talk about without leading people to believe any which way about the outcome of things. I know for a lot of people, if you say, oh my gosh, it broke me into a million pieces, then people are like, somebody died. And so you have to be really careful in talking about how it made you feel so that you don't kind of accidentally give away certain things. So I'll first talk about the themes that I think were definitely really present here. And I think that these themes are going to determine how much of an emotional connection you have and how hard the emotional moments hit. So a lot of the themes, of course, with any fantasy story with standout characters is going to very much be coming down to what the characters are dealing with. A lot of our characters are dealing with aspects of forgiving themselves for things they've done in the past, for finding, as cheesy as it sounds, self-love and acceptance of who they are. I also think because a lot of these characters are adults and we're not seeing coming of age type of a story here, we're seeing people who have lived and been through things for a while, there is this sense of how do I fit within the world, and then reshaping yourself. Here's what I thought I was before, but given my life experiences, what do I now want out of life? And when the world is changing, which is definitely a big thing with Era 2, when the world changes, how do I change with it? If any of those things that I just mentioned are things that you yourself have felt connected to in the past, then absolutely there are going to be some heavy emotional beats. Even though you are going to, as I said previously, have a lot of these things come within the action, come within the high stakes moments, they are absolutely there. They're present, and Sanderson doesn't shy away from zeroing in on an insecurity of a character, zeroing in on something that matters a lot to them, and then really putting them through it. I do think that in regards to the tone, this series, I respect that Sanderson did something different. It is so drastically different from Era 1 in that there is a significant amount of campiness to the story. I'm somebody who loves campy, but I am picky about the kind of campiness I get and how it's balanced out with the more serious moments. For me, if I had one criticism, and it is of course a very personal one, I find that the campy moments in this entire series and in this particular book as well, they took away from some of the emotional hits for me. There were moments that I was finding myself starting to feel kind of, I don't want to say choked up. I wasn't about to cry necessarily, but I don't know, maybe I would have if not for the fact that something campy would then happen. And it definitely reminds me of in real life, and I do this too, so it's kind of funny that I'm picky about this in books, but when something serious starts to happen and you make a joke or you kind of laugh it off, and you just sort of do that to cover up those deeper, harder to face feelings. This book and this series, it does that. There's a serious moment that happens, and then there's a joke that's made, or there's a serious moment that happens, and then a character does something ridiculous. And it wasn't balanced in the way that I would have liked. I think if it had been balanced out differently, I would have absolutely loved this book, but I'm a sucker for those emotional gut punches, and some of them it was like, you started to punch me, but then you sort of tickled me instead. That's a really ridiculous analogy, but it made it so that I was never in too much pain. That said, I know a lot of people love the campiness in this story. They're tired of the grimdark out there. They're tired of the apocalyptic end of the world, everybody's depressed, doom and gloom type of fantasy, and they're so grateful for the campy feel. And as a result, they have connected even more with the story because of it. So for all of you that love this series, I think it's going to hit you pretty hard. The most emotional moment for me is one that I think is not going to be emotional for basically anyone else. And I think that a lot of people would be surprised to find that my favorite moment in the book was what it was. I can't get into specifics, of course. All I'll say is that there is a moment where a character thinks that what they have experienced, that this other individual couldn't really know what that was like, and then that other individual in a way expresses that they do know what that's like, and how that moment was done. It made me have goosebumps. That moment for me was, I just thought, such a fantastic full circle. I see you, I understand you, I feel what you feel. And I wish I could say what that moment was. It's not spoiler, darn it, so I won't say it. But once you read it, you'll know what I'm talking about, or maybe you won't, because maybe that moment will just fly by and nobody else will care about it like I do. But I wanted to point that out, vague as it was, because I think that it is an example of what I was saying about the emotional moments coming down to relating to the characters and like having the characters see each other, the camaraderie in this story and the sense of teamwork. As for how I felt about this book in the way it fits into the Cosmere, I definitely am just even more excited for the future installments of various different series, and also some of the new works that Sanderson will be putting out. I'm excited to see even more of the imagination that he has and the creativity. I'm also scared and nervous and intrigued. If I was in Rashard, I'd have like anticipation spread because it's an interesting mix of emotions that I feel right now after reading that book. Overall, this exceeded my expectations. I really enjoyed this conclusion. I really like how it fit within the greater Cosmere. I really like how it delivered on its promises that we've been getting along the way. I thought it was so action-packed and high stakes in a way that I really, really genuinely cared about. I was intrigued. I liked seeing the arcs for the characters. I liked seeing, man, it feels weird to say the end of their arcs, but that's what this is. It's just anytime you get a conclusion to a series that you've been with for a while, it is sort of emotional to get to the end of it all. I didn't think that it would give Shadows of Self a run for its money as far as it being a favorite of mine within this series, but it definitely has. It might have beat out Shadows of Self. Still need some time to reflect on that, but regardless, I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks again to Macmillan Audio for giving me the chance to get around to this story early. I hope you have a great rest of your day though, and I'll see you all later. Bye.